Hi, folks. I'm very happy that we got Keith Lonsdale with us. He's deputy chair of the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom. But I think more importantly for this chat, and Keith can go into that, he's got a lot of experience in the RAF, including dealing with no-fly zones. And the reason we wanted to do this today is this term is thrown around the media like it kind of means nothing. That we should all engage ourselves in Ukraine and do this little no-fly zone. And I think Keith could really tell us what that really means in practice and the enormous implications of what's being proposed. Is that okay, Keith? Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't class myself as a strategic expert by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, I spent the guts of 20 years in the Air Force, in the Royal Air Force, and I flew transport aeroplanes for most of that time. So I was, but I left in '98. So in the you know, the Balkan War and the initial excursions into Kuwait and that kind of thing, where we set up no-fly zones, I was involved in the logistics supply side of it. So I saw how massive an operation it is to maintain a no-fly zone away from home. I think what a lot of people don't understand, though, exactly what a no-fly zone means. It's in order to enforce a no-fly zone, you have to have total air superiority over the area you want to keep free of, for want of a better description, enemy aircraft. And the only way to do that, it's not just a case of stationing fighter airplanes or surface-to-air missile systems close to the area where you want to control. And let's be realistic, an area the size of Ukraine is not going to. You're not going to be able to use surface-to-air missiles from based outside Ukraine in order to police the skies over Ukraine. They'd have to be a bit closer. These weapons are generally not long-range weapons. Fighter aircraft carrying out combat air patrols would be used to police further into or closer to the enemy territory, if you like. And that basically means you have fighter aircraft on patrol, holding station, normally with something like an AWACS aircraft, an airborne early warning and control aeroplane, flying a similar type of combat air patrol, and they would control these groups of fighters that are already airborne, ready to intercept anything that comes into the airspace that you're enforcing a no-fly zone. But in order to do that, as I said from the start, you need total air superiority, and that means that you have to disable the enemy's air defense systems. Well, most of Russia's air defense systems are in Russia, unsurprisingly. So what these people are proposing is that we launch preemptive strikes on military assets in Russia, inside Russia's borders. Now, any country in the world is going to see that as an act of war, because it is an act of war. And, you know, we will basically, by default, be at war with Russia, if we're not already. It's absolute madness. I mean, people think about, you know, the Balkans and Iraq, where we enforced no-fly zones for quite a number of years. But we'd already demolished just about everything in those countries. I mean, well, there wasn't really much of an aerial threat over the Balkans anyway. But, you know, Iraq had a fairly sizable air force. But before we started imposing no-fly zones, we'd already demolished it. We'd demolished it, we'd demolished their government, and we'd demolished their, you know, their most of their infrastructure. So there was nothing there. And we're nowhere near at that stage with Russia. And I'm God forbid that we ever would be. You know, it'd be utter madness. And I think people really need to get this into their heads that, you know, a no-fly zone is not. It's not a simple case of saying to Russia, right, you're not allowed to fly over Ukraine anymore, and if you do, we'll shoot you down. It's how you actually police and enforce that. And you cannot do that without committing acts of war.
And how far into Russia, in theory, would you have to take out air defenses to prevent them to prevent them stopping the no-fly zone policing over Ukraine.
You'd have to go as far as the range of their air defense systems. And I'm not just talking about the actual missiles that they would, or guns they would use to shoot down aircraft. I'm also, you're talking about the radar, you know, the fighter control radars. All of that kind of stuff needs to be taken out in order to, because that air, a no-fly zone means basically that that airspace is sterile. And that airspace can only become sterile if you destroy every asset that can be used to you know, to put enemy aircraft into that airspace. It's not a simple case of sending up a few, you know, guys in Typhoons or F-16s and having them, you know, flying around Ukraine, you know, taking pot shots at any Russian aircraft that comes over the border. And anyone who thinks that is really deluding themselves.
But I think the problem for us is that seems to be the way it's presented in a lot of these superficial media interviews, that is the impression you get, that it's like, okay, send over 6 planes, or, you know, I'm just saying 6 for the sake of argument, and say you're not flying. But from what you're saying, you're actually talking about like a massive destruction of the defense infrastructure inside Russia. Otherwise, this won't work. Basically,
you've got to. You can't enforce a no-fly zone unless you neutralise the opponent's air power.
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
You know, it's all very well saying, you know, people think, oh, maybe the Russian airplanes are based in Moscow, and we'll just make sure that, you know, if they get a bit close, if they get too close, we'll be ready to shoot them down. You can't do that.
Yeah,
it's nonsense.
Yeah.
You know, that all of that air defense structure has got to be destroyed, and then of course Russia will just move more assets into the area.
Yeah.
So then you're back to square one again. Whereas it doesn't stop. It escalates to total war very, very quickly. Like I say, people need to get their heads around the fact that we're not dealing with, you know, a dysfunctional, you know, third world state with an obsolescent armed forces and knackered equipment and poorly trained troops. We're dealing with a global superpower. You know,
well, is it that are people being tricked a bit by these media interviews into thinking this is not that big a deal? Because that's always the impression you get. This is just like, why not just do a no-fly zone? But I mean, as soon as you start thinking through the consequences, it's mind-boggling what's being proposed.
It's difficult to know whether it's actually serious or whether it's just narrative building. You know, whether I mean, we don't know, because basically all of the media, all Russian media, for instance, or anything that's pro-Russian has been shut down. So we're only getting one side of the story, and it's already been shown from very early on that the side of the story that we're getting is largely consisted of a normal amount of BS. We're not being told the truth. Even the BBC was called out very early on for using recycled footage from decades ago and claiming it was what was currently going on in Ukraine. The claims about Russian casualties that we're hearing from the Ukrainians, I think, are incredulous, to say the least. I think they're talking about the 14,000 troops being killed and countless tanks. There's no evidence of this. There's no real evidence of this anywhere, except in statements from Zelensky and his government. You know, so it really is a crazy situation, and I do wonder whether they are serious about this or whether it is narrative building. Because, like I say, we don't know what stage we're at. We don't know where Putin and Zelensky are in the negotiations, and it could be that all of this comes to a very abrupt end in the next few days, and I hope it does. But then we'll have the narrative bashers who will say that it was the threat of a no-fly zone that caused Putin to concede whatever he was forced to concede to Zelensky. I personally don't think he will concede very much, and I think Putin's demands are very simple, and in many ways they're not unreasonable. You know, he wants a buffer between Russia and NATO. That's what Russia was promised at the fall of communism. You know, when Ukraine became an independent state, They were promised this, and that promise hasn't been kept in many ways. And I think Putin also wants an end to the bombardment of eastern Ukraine, the ethnic Russian populations there, who have, whether the votes were legitimate or not is irrelevant. The fact is that a very, very large majority of them have expressed a wish to no longer have anything to do with Ukraine, as is their right under the United Nations charters. So yeah, I mean, those claims are those demands from Putin are very reasonable, and I think Zelensky has already said this week that Ukraine will not join NATO, and if further concessions are made with regard to the Donbass region, I think we could see this conflict coming to an end, and then, like I say, the narrative clashes over in the West, basically saying this is because we threatened him with a no-fly zone. So it could all be hubris, and I sincerely hope it is, because we will be in a very, very, very bad place if if we end up in a full-blown war with Russia.
Good. Okay, and there's that is the implication of a no-fly zone. It's not a little send a few planes over and everything will be fine. It's a full scale.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
No.
All right. Thanks for that. I will post that up, and hopefully that will educate people into how serious and insane, frankly, that proposal really is. So
it is crazy. It is absolutely crazy.
Okay.
It's,
Good.
But yeah. Well,
All
thanks
right.
anyway. Thanks for asking.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks.